the continuation of this whole crisis that's developing in Gaza with respect to the funding being cut by 19 countries right now to the UNRWA organization. And astonishingly, as we make our way through this, we're beginning to understand that no country has actually seen any proof provided by Israel. Israel makes these very serious allegations that 12 members of the UNRWA organization were engaged or involved somehow with the October the 7th attack on Israel. And as a consequence of that, many nations have cut their funding. But as we're finding out, they didn't cut their funding based on any proof that was provided other than the allegations being made by Israel.
The Israelis know these names is because UNRWA, as part of the zero tolerance policy and its commitment to neutrality, passed on to the Israelis last May, let's be precise, the entire staff list of UNRWA in Gaza and the West Bank in digital form to the Israelis. It had already been run through the Security Council's terrorism list, and Israel didn't come back with a single complaint. It was only until after the ICJ ruling, the day after the ICJ ruling accusing Israel of plausible genocide.
Now keep in mind, these documents were released only to selective media around the world and a handful of governments.
Question on Gaza. Did the White House receive an ironclad evidence that actually the UNRWA staff member, 12 of them, were involved in the October 7 attack? Because 4 news organizations, including Financial Times, Channel 4, and Sky News, found no evidence to support the Israeli claim. They said actually what they provided was just cell phone messages and cards that being found after Israel went to this.
Yes. Not everybody has seen these, but these 4 news agencies have said that they got their hands on a copy of the allegations being made by Israel. And to quote them, they basically said, these are dodgy allegations. In one case they said, and in the other case they said, these are sketchy. It's a sketchy dossier.
Even Mr. Blinken, the UN Secretary of State, has said that the Americans have not been able independently to corroborate this evidence of what I'm calling and what is now established in the international discourse, the Dodgy Dossier. That's a reference to the dossier, the intelligence dossier, upon which Mr. Blair, former British Prime Minister, took Britain to war in Iraq.
Now listen, it's quite possible that all of these 12 employees, or some of these 12 employees, were engaged or involved in the attack on Israel. That's a possibility. But they have not furnished any of that information, not even to the United Nations, who are charged with the responsibility of investigating. So here's the position that the United Nations is in. You've got Israel making these serious allegations against a major agency of the United Nations, and they gave him a flimsy document only afterwards, after they had leaked it to the media and given it to several other countries, did they finally give it to the United Nations. But they only gave them the bare bones, the allegations on one sheet of paper. That's all they gave them, and then there was 4 or 5 other pages attached, but that was basically just an attack on the UNRWA organization, which Israel has been engaged in for the past 2 decades. But astonishingly, Canada still went ahead and cut the funding to UNRWA based on simple allegations being made by Israel. And let's face it, folks, Israel has not been the most honest with the world when it comes to the crisis that's taken place, with the bombardment that's taken place, with the possibility of genocide that's taken place inside of Gaza. We all heard about the 40 babies that were beheaded, which turned out to be a bogus claim. And we all heard about how the Hamas had a headquarters in a war room underneath one of the main hospitals in Gaza, which that too turned out to be bogus. So they don't have a good record of actually telling the truth. So when you see allegations coming forth, which very curiously took place on the day that the International Criminal Court of Justice basically plausibly accused Israel of committing acts of genocide. On that very day, they released these documents, or a document that's alleging that 12 members of the UNRWA organization participated in the attack in Israel. Chris Gunness, he's the former spokesperson for the UNRWA organization from 2007 till 2019. He's made a very interesting point, and that is that those countries that have suspended their funding or cut their funding completely to the UNRWA organization could very well find themselves being complicit in the genocide being committed inside of Gaza. Because the ICJ, International Court of Justice, basically in one of their provisions or their rulings, basically said that the aid going into Gaza must increase.
Aid agencies are warning of famine amid profound food shortages, with 250,000 people in Gaza already starving. The healthcare system has collapsed, and the lack of water and sanitation has prompted outbreaks of illness and disease. Most of the residents in Gaza have been internally displaced, with more than half the population sheltering in facilities run by UNRWA.
Chris Gunness, you have called the cutting of aid to UNRWA, the U.S. most important, overwhelmingly gives more than any other country, immoral and illegal. Why illegal?
Because it's very clear that international humanitarian law, which expressly prohibits the use of humanitarian aid, food aid, as a political weapon, and the Genocide Convention makes it an obligation on state parties to prevent genocide. And if you don't prevent genocide, then you are guilty of violating the convention. And the fact that mass starvation is already breaking out suggests that the Genocide Convention is being violated.
There's no question that we have to see more aid going into Gaza. Right now, there's about 50 trucks a day. It would take about 500 trucks loads of humanitarian aid going into Gaza to be able to alleviate the crisis. And UNRWA is essentially saying that they've got enough money basically to run until the end of February, maybe the beginning of March. And after that, they run out of money. So in other words, these countries will be complicit, according to Chris Gunness, in the crime of genocide. If there are going to be tens of thousands of people dying of starvation, dying of disease, malnutrition, you name it, any sorts of problems that will stem from cutting the funding and leaving 2.3 million people destitute.
And I would like to see some proper investigation into the frameworks that are there for the donors who are accusing UNRWA of politicization. I would like to say, what are the donors doing in a way which is accountable and which is transparent, to show to the world how they ring-fenced their humanitarian decision-making process and to keep it immune from politics.
So to conclude, there's no question that an investigation, a serious investigation, needs to take place regarding the allegations being made by Israel. However, Israel has a responsibility to pass over to the United Nations all of the proof that they've got to back up the allegations that they've made. Because those allegations have led to at least 19 countries cutting the funding at a time when the International Court of Justice have basically said we have to be increasing the aid going into Gaza. And at the same time as those rulings came down and accused Israel of plausibly committing acts of genocide, they turn around on the very same day and release these allegations without any proof, thereby causing all kinds of nations across the world, 19 of them, to cut funding to an already impoverished people. Not only impoverished, but people who are destitute, who are starving, who are living in tents, who are dying of disease, who are dying of starvation. They've exacerbated that problem. And I just, for the life of me, can't understand how nations would go along with these allegations without any proof and cut the funding and exacerbate the problem that the International Court of Justice was trying to solve, making themselves, I believe, and according to Chris Gunness, the former spokesperson for the UNRWA organization, making him complicit in acts of genocide if people start to die by the tens of thousands as a consequence. But leaving that issue aside, one thing is absolutely clear, and that is the world is not going back and Palestine is not going back to the way it was. They're not going to go back to an occupation of the West Bank. They're not going to go back to a blockade of Gaza. They're not going back where they're being deprived of East Jerusalem being the capital for the Palestinian state. So whatever happens, Israel needs to get the message that the jig is up. That there's going to be a whole new paradigm have to be constructed, where Palestinians are treated as equal citizens, where Palestinians have human rights, where Palestinians are respected, where Palestinians can live in peace in a sovereign state side by side with Israel. Now, whatever that looks like, obviously that is out there, remains to be negotiated. But Israel needs to get the message that the world is not going back to the apartheid state that they've been running for the last 56 years, and the subjugation of the Palestinians that they've engaged in for the last 75 years. That has got to end. That will end. So, my friends, you've been listening to Straight Talk with Sid Ryan.